It's so cool.
But I think, a good example of that is in Hong Kong prior to the current political situation there. They actually implemented a form of that, of land value capture, that where part of the proceeds of that is going to fund the actual operations, not simply the management of the system.
Yeah.
Because the inflation of land values, it does a few things. So you've probably heard about, the productivity crisis that people are talking about. The Canadian economy isn't productive enough. The number one subtrahend to productivity is the higher compound debt obligation levied against land that prevents a business or, from reinvesting in whether it's, its workforce or in, modernizing technology or whatever. And the reason for that is because if you're paying a higher percentage in rent or in basically that compound debt burden, you can't put that into increasing things that are going to increase productivity. So this is kind of the core of the problem. And the thing that doesn't get talked a lot about is that a land value tax will actually not just stabilize and moderate, but it'll bring down, and you can do this in a controlled fashion gently, but it'll bring down land values to where they're not having these outside effects. A good example of how this kind of works here in Vancouver is the Red Gate. Does anyone go to the Red Gate? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's like arts kind of center, a lot of offbeat music venue. And a while ago they had a real problem, which was, so these kind of venues exist in places where the land is not being used anywhere near highest and best use. I mean, it's not as egregious as we're going to get a lot and we're going to squat it for 15 years and put a community farm on it because it's a gas station that's off-gassing and we're going to call it a farm, we're going to apply for farm tax status. It's not quite that egregious, but it's one of those situations where it's nowhere near highest and best use. There's a triple net lease in place. And so as, SkyTrains are built or as OCP's amendments come in and the highest and best use value under our assessment system goes up, it's actually weaponized. That arts community is weaponized against, ironically, this really good assessment system because of the triple net lease they're under. It means their tax burden goes way through the roof because they're being taxed as if this is a 20-story apartment building and not a, half derelict art space, right? So and so this is a common problem. I'm singling out Red Gate, but this is really a common problem, and these arts communities are actually weaponized to attack the very assessment system that is really world class, has excellent people running it or and working at it, and was designed in its foundation by the people that set it up in the 1970s to eventually do a land value tax.
I guess they can legislate away triple net leases, at least for property taxes.
Yeah.
Well, the landlord should be eating that bullet, not the commercial tenant.
Well, and this is the problem. There's all these solutions, but the solutions that are too often proposed aren't that. It's simply, it's simply to give the landowner a break, and then basically make it incentivize a landowner to have another avenue to basically bring down their tax burden. So they're not compelled to develop this land. In fact, it's advantageous to squat land for long periods of time. The holding cost should be higher for land that we want to develop, right? So if there's key land that needs to get developed to meet our housing needs, then it should be, we should be incentivizing that development.
This is a dinner. We ordered from a from a Mediterranean falafel place, and yeah, we'll set that up for shortly after we're done our talks here. Okay, great. Did you want to mention anything about these self-financing affordable housing projects you're working on?
Yeah, I don't want to get into them too much because I think we haven't completed them, and I don't really want to talk about stuff we haven't finished.
It's just so exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff. I mean, what I'll say is that our union made some very smart investment decisions that proactively predicted the oil crash in 2015. As a result of that, we had an incredible surplus in our funds. We were able to roll some of that surplus into purchasing some real estate. And we then were doing an affordable housing new union office build on that real estate. And the thing really underpinning it is that because of the tremendous land value increase since purchasing it, the risk backstop for us is that the land value increases vastly exceed the soft costs we've put into that development so far. So I think it's going very well. I think we're we're proceeding, and we've passed 4th reading in Burnaby. But I mean, I don't really want to talk too much about it until it's finished. But I'll just say it's a very exciting project, and I think I'll get more into it when we finish it.
All right. Any questions for Paul from the audience?
Just in terms of that last comment you talked about with the development, are you aware of Addy Invest?
No.
Here? So Addy Invest is a new kind of company in Vancouver, and they essentially crowdfund development funds. So they fractionalize development into small $2,500 amounts. Just an interesting idea for getting rid of the mortgage costs and the debt costs. So a bunch of equity can be held into a property and then develop it, and everybody holds the equity, but there is no interest that's involved in it. So it's just kind of an interesting concept.
It's an interesting concept. The single biggest concern I'd have with that is that if you don't have an active interest that controls the credit obligation that's being levied for a development, the X factor in any development is price escalation and risk. And so if you don't have a concerted controlling interest that is basically saying, yes, we are watching this risk, we are managing this risk, the terms, unless it's like a guaranteed, unless it's like a bond, essentially, where you're clipping a coupon, that's one thing. But if it's an investment where it's a variable rate of return that you're not really certain of, that's another issue, because when you have a variable rate of return on that investment, you want to have an active interest controlling the credit risk, especially on a project where it's indeterminate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like with price escalations and everything being over budget.
Yeah.
Like everything is in BC.
You see this in a lot of, exactly. I mean, a lot of the projects here are for a variety, and one of them is the constraint on supply of construction materials, skilled trades, all that kind of stuff. This is actually, there's one thing I wanted to address, which I think is really important. There is a debate in the BC, and this is a very small community, but the BC kind of urban planning community around, should we tax land value, or can we just build our way out of the affordability problem, which is, can we just basically the supply booster thing? And I think it's an interesting, a bit of it's a false debate, because I think most people are saying, yeah, we want a ton more supply, we need a ton more supply, and the question is how we get there. So it's a bit of a false debate a bit. I'm certainly not in the camp that we should prevent development in neighborhoods to preserve their archaic 50-year-old character. I don't agree with that, but I think we need a lot more development, a ton of it. But there's this idea that by incentivizing supply, more supply in the market, we can create a price shock. And this is fundamentally wrong from an economic standpoint. You cannot, I'll put it this way, the thing that CMHC actually produces a good report on this that measures market elasticity across cities in Canada, inelasticity. To go back to the kind of Paul Samuelson vibe, and I'm not an acolyte of Samuelson, but it's worth knowing what these how this works. And inelasticity of demand essentially means that you require much greater supply to have a shock on the price effect, or the speculative value price effect. And why that's really important is when you break it down, there's not enough raw materials and skilled tradespeople and rebar and concrete and everything else and cranes in Vancouver to build the supply that would create a price shock. There is not the supply, there is not the materials that are necessary for it. And on top of that, the amount of capital required to finance the land purchase and the developments is so high that it's relatively inconceivable that we're going to create a price shock by supply alone. I think it's pretty near impossible without some very outside the market, almost Deus ex machina like interventions. So I think we really need to challenge the fantasy fiction narrative around supply, the supply side only, and I think but we need to do that in a responsible way. We're also saying, hey, this isn't an argument against development. This is an argument for development and mass development. But I think that's a really important point to make, is that we simply, the Vancouver is one of the most inelastic markets in Canada, and there is not the ability to create a supply shock here anytime soon. Maybe under different circumstances, maybe some fundamentals changed. We're nowhere close to that.
Wow. I have a burning question. I find it so fascinating that one of the most prominent unions have become one of the most vocal champions for housing and for land value capture. And that to me is so interesting. I'm just curious how that came to be, and whether you think there's a case for not just every union to advocate for this, but every working person.
Yeah, we think through our analysis of the market that this is the best way forward and the best policy prescription to fix the affordable housing crisis our members are experiencing. We've done polling both in British Columbia and across our membership on this problem at various times. And what we found is about a third of our, I'm kind of doing rough justice with the numbers here, but a third of our members own homes outright. A third of our members have mortgages where the bank owns their home or the creditor owns their home and they're paying a mortgage, and a third of them are renters. But what we're seeing in that group is that a majority of them are in a very difficult scenario, and the vast majority of them can't afford to move, because if they were to refinance or they were to rent somewhere else, they would get pushed out of their neighborhood. And that means pushed out of where they basically not just built their life, but that's adjacent to where they work. So for our members of our union, this is an incredibly significant issue. And so it's actually a major plank. One of the things we realized in collective bargaining with our employers, which includes the government, so the government is the direct or indirect employer of the majority of our members, is that we cannot negotiate as a union price increases that keep up with the inflation on land prices. We can't do it. And so fundamentally,